Hi Bible 101, it's Sarah. So this week we're going to talk more about covenants. We're going to add another idea, the idea of being called or having a calling. But before we get there, let's remember last week talking about Noah and the story of God's covenant with Noah. That's how you ended the lesson, remembering that God made a promise to sustain life and not destroy it. And it's written down in the 8th chapter of Genesis, verse 22. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So God made a covenant with Noah and every living creature. And in chapter 9 of Genesis, verse 11, God says, I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God names the rainbow as a sign of that covenant in the next two verses. God said, this is a sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. This week, we'll be talking about another covenant that God made, this time with Abram and Sarai. Maybe you remember Abram and Sarai? They wandered in the desert box for many, many stories back in Godly Play, and God gave them new names, Abraham and Sarah, and they became the first people of God, our ancestors. So, some things to think about as you're discussing Abram and Sarai's story with Phil today. The first is, what is a covenant? And sometimes people say a covenant, well, it's like a contract. But what is the difference between a covenant and a contract? Well, covenant is a pledge or a promise made between two parties, maybe two people, maybe God and people. And it's based in love. A contract, it's a little more transactional. I give you this, you give me that. I do this for you, you do this for me. I do this, you give me some cold hard cash. That's a contract. And a contract is kind of usually short term. It's going to be over and done with pretty quick. Whereas a covenant can be a lifelong commitment made between two entities. And it's made in relationship, knowing that it needs to be fulfilled over time. Okay, final thought. God calls Abraham, and God appears to Abraham in visions, speaks to Abraham in dreams. So what does it mean that God called Abraham? And what does it mean to be called to something? A calling can be really big. It can be like your life's work, the most important thing to you that you're passionate about and excited about, and the thing that makes you feel the most you and brings out the best in you. That could be your calling. But a calling can also be small. It can be a decision you make in the moment, how to respond to something, how to stand up for someone or for something. Could just be something you did yesterday. So you might have experienced a calling in your life, a big one or a small one already, but maybe you haven't. Maybe it's something that's still coming. But usually, if you pay attention and listen, especially listen to your heart, at some point in your life, you'll experience this feeling, this calling. And at the end of today's lesson, you'll get a chance to write down some thoughts about that. Okay, time for Abraham and Sarah, the story of the call.